Thank you so much, Mr. Tsuruda, for that inspiring opening. And of course, that beautifully sets the scene for our upcoming panel discussion. And now we'll move on to our panel discussion, Investment Mobilization Towards a Clean Energy Future. Once again, if you'd like to post a question, you may use the Q&A function in session 1 on the agenda in the ACES app. And now, it is my pleasure to invite the following panelists on stage, starting with Heidi Yip, Head of Sustainable and Transition Solutions, Southeast Asia, BlackRock. And she'll be joined by Dr. Mousumi Bhat, Vice President of Sustainability Programs, SEMI. And joining them is Jackie Surtani, Regional Director, ADB Singapore Office, Southeast Asia Department, ADB, and also Dato Razib Dawood, CEO, Energy Commission.
Hi, Jackie.
Very nice.
And our moderator for today is
Heidi.
Albert Cheung, Deputy CEO, Head of Global Transition Analysis, BloombergNEF.
How are you?
Hello again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, panelists, for joining us. And without further ado, I'd like to hand the time over to Albert Cheung. Over to you.
Thank you. Good morning. Welcome to our panel discussion on mobilizing investment for clean energy here in Asia. It's my great pleasure to be hosting this discussion with such a distinguished panel of leaders. So a warm welcome to you all as well, and thank you for being here to share your insights. Maybe just briefly at BNEF, we see a very bright future for clean energy here in the ASEAN region. Although renewables investment and deployment have actually dropped in the last couple of years since the very high boom years in 2020 and 2021, we're now forecasting a steady increase in wind and solar installations across the region. So we actually think there'll be around 3 gigawatts deployed this year, which is up from the last couple of years. And we think that continues to rise to over 10 gigawatts per year of new installations of renewables in the year 2030. So the future is bright, and we're also starting to see significant investments into battery energy storage in the region, mainly driven by Philippines, but also in other countries beginning as well now. Of course, there's still plenty of work to do to unlock more progress in the region, and there are some risks that could undermine progress, such as around supply chains and trade, around availability of capital, around grid development. And I think we're going to talk about some of these. Hopefully, we'll get into that in the panel discussion. So with all of that in mind, Heidi, I'd like to ask you to kick things off, maybe to talk a bit more about this landscape. So maybe you could just talk a bit about the clean energy landscape that you see across the region, and how which areas and which markets BlackRock can already deploy kind of significant capital, and where are the areas which still require a bit more maturity?
Sure, Albert. Thanks, first of all, for having me here. So I think at BlackRock, we have been increasing our exposure to Southeast Asian clean energy for several years. Right? At this moment, we have invested over $1 billion in clean energy and renewable infrastructure across a number of markets in the region. And this, in the last few years, it has pretty much scaled up quite a bit. It's right now about a fifth of our total APAC deal count. Last count was in 2023. Right, so let me share a little bit about where we're seeing these investments take off. In Philippines, Malaysia, and Thailand, we have invested in a total of 3 gigawatts of solar capacity in the past few years through our climate finance partnership. This is across the 3 markets, and we have been partnering with companies on the ground, including Diatronic Energy in Malaysia, Clean Tech Renewables in Philippines, as well as Chow Energy in Thailand, right? And all of them are looking to build platforms to scale up their solar capacity, both industrial and commercial utility-grade solar for the communities there, right? So the impact is actually quite profound, because while the infrastructure is in the process of being built up, we anticipated actually creating at least more affordable clean energy access to 125,000 households. That's just in the Philippines. And some of the other markets, right, in total will create about 3,500 jobs. Over the lifetime of these projects, we anticipate being able to avoid emissions of up to 5 million tons of greenhouse gases. Right, so this traditional, I guess today we can say that's quite mature in terms of technology, right? It's kind of traditional renewable energy now. But there is still scope for us to continue driving investments into other regions, other sectors, adjacent sectors like grid technology, battery storage. That's really quite important to enable renewable power to scale. We have seen, for instance, in Vietnam, right, in the last 3 years, there has been an incredible amount of renewable energy capacity built up, 20 gigawatts of solar and wind in some regions, but these tend to be concentrated in the southern part of Vietnam, right? And what it needs to get this capacity and this renewable power that's being generated to the right markets, right, where at the right times is better interconnectivity in terms of grids. We heard earlier in the morning that actually grid transmission, there isn't transition without transmission, right? And we heard that from the minister. So that's something we really echo. There is a lot of opportunity there in this market.
Thank you very much. Razib, if I may turn to you, Malaysia is starting to see significant deployments of solar. So maybe you could just talk a bit about what's driving that growth and what plans there are to keep sustaining and accelerating that growth.
Thank you, Alfred. Thank you for the question. And first of all, I'd like to thank the organizer for inviting Energy Commission by Malaysia to participate in this forum. Yeah, you're right. Since the launching of our roadmap last year by the Prime Minister, we have this clear target, a clear path that we're going to achieve net zero by 2050. Then you heard a series of announcements, data centers coming up. So that's on top, actually. So that what driving us actually to meet our two-thirds of capacity mix, 70% of energy by 2050. That's a huge, before we announced our data center coming up in Malaysia, that equivalent to about 70 gigawatt. Soon we're going to announce this result of the auction, the last auction, the round number 5, the large-scale solar. We're going to reach about 7,000 megawatt of solar in Peninsular Malaysia. So as you said, these hyperscaler data centers, they demand renewable energy. Not only renewable energy, they demand reliable and secure renewable energy, secure infrastructure. That poses a challenge to us. Again, we learned since the beginning of 2011, we started with the feed-in tariff, the premium solar rooftop, and we evolved through net energy metering. Then we launched a big auction, large-scale solar. Then we introduced corporate PPA, the virtual PPA. Now, recently, we make a bold announcement on third-party access. We call it CRES. Ultimately, 2050, the net zero target, that's driving everything. And on top of that, on this demand grows exponentially, really high demand. Then we have to get ready to serve those demands securely. And of course, with green energy, we have to put up all the capacity. And of course, we're going to talk about grid and readiness of our grid and so on and so forth. And we are solar-centric. In Malaysia, Peninsular Malaysia, we don't have other big resources. We do have small biomass, biogas, and we have really harvested all the big hydro, only a small mini hydro. So the solar is our main focus at the moment. Of course, we have studied why we need battery, because of the penetration of solar is getting higher and higher. So we need to stabilize the system. And don't forget about ASEAN power grid. We do need YBhg to counterbalance all this variability within this ASEAN region. That come handy on top of efficiency of the soil resources and demand and so on. So the variability of the solar helps when we interconnect with all these ASEAN member states. Yeah. So, everything's all on the table. Nothing rule out, rule in. Well, you can talk about small modular reactors and so on and so forth. Those also are options. Again, to answer your question, high demand, we're going to move forward. We're going to be very progressive in our policy regulatory frameworks, markets, design, and so on, so that enable for us. At the end of the day, 2050 is our clear target of reaching net zero. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So we've already touched on the importance of having clean energy, clear programs for clean energy, lowering barriers for entry for clean energy grid development. Jackie, let's talk a bit about finance and the role of development finance in this equation. So maybe you could just speak a bit about the role of ADB in financing clean energy in Southeast Asia and where the funds are flowing today.
Yeah, thanks, Albert. Try to keep this as short as possible. So, I mean, in a nutshell, I mean, ADB has positioned itself as the climate bank for Asia and the Pacific. And everything, you talk to anybody at ADB and you ask us what is our strategy, it's all about climate. And our president has committed $100 billion in climate finance between 2019 and 2030. So the focus is there. I think that the real challenge is where are the deals? And you know, we hear a lot of great announcements as we did this morning. But I think if you talk to the financiers, they're really challenged as to where the transactions are. So, and it's sadly, it's a little bit opportunistic. I mean, if you ask us about 2 years ago, we financed 6 renewable energy projects in Vietnam. And we also closed a cross-border project from Laos to Vietnam for 600 megawatts called Monsoon Wind. And that's fantastic. But again, we see a little bit of a drying up recently. And I hope Vietnam continues with its pathway towards net zero, because I think there was a lot of energy there. Philippines seems to be making a lot of great announcements. That's in our backyard. So we're really very optimistic that we'll see a lot of renewable energy in the Philippines. Indonesia, I think the challenge there is very much that it's got a lot of very competitive coal-fired power. And maybe that's, again, one thing that I'd like to slightly touch on, maybe a little bit different from some of my fellow panelists, is that if you're really going to focus on doing more and more in renewable energy, we all in this room have to tackle reducing the asset life of coal-fired power plants. You cannot only focus purely on renewable energy if you don't do anything about transitioning out of coal. And I think that's a topic that unfortunately is not getting enough attention. That both of these issues have to be discussed hand in hand. I mean, if I end by just leaving a small example, if you look at the country of Indonesia again, on the island of Java, many people don't realize that actually on Java Island itself, there's currently an oversupply of power. So if you tell the Indonesian government, I want to build more solar and wind, they're going to say, well, first of all, I don't need the power on Java. So how are you going to persuade the Indonesian government to do renewable energy unless you start reducing the asset life of coal-fired plants? I can come back to that, and we can talk a little bit more about, again, the fantastic initiatives by the EMA on the Singapore import projects a little bit later, but I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Jackie. Mousumi, some of the panelists here have already spoken a bit about the importance of the demand side and demand. You obviously represent an important industry here in the region that is an important energy consumer. So maybe you could just talk a bit about your work at SEMI and why this topic is so important to the semiconductor industry in the region.
Sure. Thank you, Albert. I represent this semiconductor trade association called SEMI. This is normally not one of our common conferences to attend, but it also goes to show the interdependency we have, in this green transition, in this energy conversation. So I'm excited to be here, and I'm also excited to, see the opportunities that we have over here for accelerating our journey. So semiconductors, I think we all became a very visible sector post-COVID. And of course, right behind it came the whole conversation around sustainability, supply chain resilience, sustainable operations, sustainable manufacturing. So as all of you probably know, the industry is growing fast. The sector is, driven by the demand that follows it, the super AI era and all of that. So the demand and the whole market is growing. We expect that the market will be as much as about, over $1 trillion by 2030. That's the good news. The bad news, of course, is our carbon footprint grows along with it. And so within SEMI, I lead the sustainability efforts. And within sustainability, our biggest problem today is being able to decarbonize our energy sources. We did a study last year together with the Boston Consulting Group, which looked at our entire market and looked at basically doing a baselining exercise for ourselves so we understood where things were. And one of the big conclusions that came out of it was 83% of our emissions can be influenced or addressed by looking for cleaner sources of energy. So that's the demand scenario, if you will. Plenty of opportunity, and I'll look forward to more conversations through these next couple of days to see how we can work together to accelerate that the gap we have between our demand and the supply of clean energy that's available.
Thank you very much. So when we look at the global picture, we all saw at the end of last year, COP28, the UAE consensus included a line saying we will accelerate to triple the global installed base of renewables by 2030, and I think it was from a base of 2022. But whichever way you cut it, global renewable deployment needs to go faster to get on track for a tripling by 2030. And in this region, actually, I think it needs to go even faster than the global average because we're starting from a slightly lower base compared to some other economies. So I suppose I just want to talk a bit about how do we move faster, how do we accelerate progress, and maybe Jackie and Heidi, I'll turn to you both first, maybe just to talk about what do you think, either from a policy perspective or otherwise, what do you think what do we need to see to start to accelerate and get on track for that tripling?
Heidi first.
Sure. So yeah, I think you're right? There's a lot more investment needed to accelerate the build-up of renewables in this region. At BlackRock, we see three key drivers behind the low carbon transition, and that's really the existence of affordable technology, right? Technological readiness is one key factor, and today we're already seeing a lot of renewable technology being on par and available at the same cost or even better than traditional energy sources. So that's one hurdle tackled. The other driver is having an enabling policy environment, and we've already heard a lot of very promising announcements and commitments to collaborate in this region, which I think is a step in the right direction. The third driver is really more on the consumer side, on the demand side. So it's the changing consumer and investor preferences. And here, I think there's still some hurdles to tackle, right? One of which is the affordability of clean energy vis-a-vis traditional sources. So that's something that a combination of policy incentives, government frameworks, and also corporate scale up, right? Leveraging economies of scale can help to address over time, right? But in the immediate term, what we really need is more private capital to come in to help finance the buildup of the renewable capacity that we need. And where is this going to come from, right? I think the starting point today we've been seeing is governments coming in first to lay the foundation and de-risk some of these key investments, especially in terms of long-term capital expenditures that need to be put in. But in Southeast Asia, I think that we have a little bit of a complicated issue to solve, which is that the populations are growing, right? Energy demand is growing along with it. The key industries that are powering these economies tend to be a little bit more carbon intensive than when you compare it with the rest of the world. So there are all these forces that are driving, the carbon footprint of this region to increase even as the region gets wealthier. And at the same time, a lot of the traditional power sources, the capital stock that the government has might be locked up in a younger fleet of fossil fuel powered plants. Right? So how do we liberate that, right? And how do we accelerate the capital recycling out of these assets? We do need the private markets to come in. Right? Our estimates are that today's investments in renewable energy and transition infrastructure in the region needs to grow by 17 to 24 times more than what's available today based on public commitments. About 60% of that will need to come from the private markets. And in order for private markets to participate in this, institutional investors that we've spoken to globally all have a few constraints with investing more, right, in emerging markets. They're not structured to take too much emerging market risk. Their allocations tend to be more skewed towards developed markets just because of how they are indexed. So in order to be able to mobilize more private capital into the region, we actually do need to tap on blended finance structures to help de-risk some of these real or perceived risks, right, that private capital currently experiences. I'll pause there and I'll see if Jackie wants to add in.
No, I mean, just to build on what Heidi was saying, I think, first let's start with the big picture. My career has just been 100% in Asia. But one of the things I find always having to persuade people who are not from Asia is why Asia is such an attractive continent to invest in, right? You would think all our growth figures, the demand, as Dato, you mentioned for Malaysia, are compelling. But yet, when you talk to investors outside this region, if you're a development institution, you think the real demand is in Africa. If you're a US institutional investor, you've got enough, both from a return perspective and a perceived risk, that why should I bother with Asia? I can get all my demand right here in the US or in Europe. So I think one of the big challenges for us here in Asia is we still need to, all of us collectively in this room, we need to still show that why Asia is a compelling place to invest in. And then secondly, in terms of, how do we do more in renewable energy? One of the phrases that, I keep on telling people is we need to start becoming more boring here in this region. What do I mean by that? Every time we do a new deal, we close monsoon wind, right? We need to do 10 of monsoon winds, right? Not just one. We need to do the same deal again and again and again. Let's not change the rules in these countries. Let's not mess around with the PPA. Just keep on doing cookie cutter deals. And that, again, I think is missing. Every time people come and look at a certain country, they say, oh, okay, we've just built up. I see there's a little bit of a track record, and then there's some change in regulation. And I think investors are interested in those countries that show a very consistent track record and show that, okay, look, everybody else is focusing on Malaysia, right? What am I missing? I should also invest in Malaysia. And please, please do that for your country, is build up that consistency. So I think that's what's missing. And then lastly, I think we're in, for those of us who, like myself, have paid for my sins financing coal-fired power plants because I'm an old man, when we used to do coal or gas, these were very, very large projects. Now when you look at renewable energy, one of my colleagues, spent 2 years doing a rooftop solar project, really cool rooftop solar project in Vietnam, where our commitment was $3 million. $3 million for an awesome rooftop solar project. It's great, but we need to find ways to maybe do more sort of these portfolio type financings, maybe even across a bunch of countries. I'm so encouraged by the likes of BlackRock coming into this space more and more. We need more people like Heidi to look at this space. But for her investors, she needs volume, larger deals. She's not going to invest in a $3 million deal, and she needs consistency. So we need to persuade the likes of BlackRock, that Asia is a very compelling region to invest in. I'll stop there. Thank you.
I'll just add in, I think to echo Jackie's point, right? Having good templates and models that already work, right? The proof of concept has already been done, where those types of partnerships exist to replicate them and to give more firepower to help scale those up even more. I think that is quite important because from our experience building up the climate finance partnership, it actually took years of negotiating with different stakeholders to try to align incentives and align objectives. Right? Governments, MDBs, catalytic partners are all looking to drive impact at scale, whereas institutional investors and the likes of our clients, right, are looking for risk-adjusted returns and exposure in emerging markets that are commensurate with what they are prepared to take and get exposure to in other parts of the world, right? And so how do you marry that? And when you found a partnership that works and actually can align all these different stakeholders' objectives in a way that tranches out the risk appropriately, that model needs to be scaled up and quickly so that we don't spend a lot more years just at the negotiating table.
Thank you. And Razib, you've heard these comments from, I guess, sort of investors and lenders, but you also spend a lot of time with industry in Malaysia hearing about the opportunities. So what do you think, when you think about all those discussions that you have, what are the key challenges for the scale up in Malaysia and what can be done to go even faster?
Yeah, before I answer challenges in Malaysia, thank you for nice word from ADB, my colleague. I look at this ASEAN Power Grid in glass half full. And next year, Malaysia will be a chairman of ASEAN. We are brewing up, we're going to make a massive proposal how to realize this 20-30 years dream. Our 4 leaders that have been discussing this, how to realize this APG. We realized European took some time to form this European grid despite their top-down legislation, European Union and so on. We are just loosely in a club of ASEAN, 10 ASEAN countries. But, well, what different actually before, I used to work with utility before, when we discuss ASEAN Power Grid, we have this old philosophy of self-sufficiency. That was before energy transition, but not anymore. The time has changed. We have to depend on each other. Pockets of resources, Laos, and pockets of demand and so on. And, well, they don't have to actually export their resources. They just have to export electron. They can keep their resources in their country, increase the premium, and sell at the highest price for the importing countries, right? So, yeah, ASEAN Power Grids have the potential investment on infrastructure. Talk about renewable energy project alone, massive infrastructure. Take a of this proposal of submarine cable from Sarawak to Singapore and Sarawak to Peninsula. There's massive billions of ringgit or Sing dollar involved. And we are looking at, other submarine cable from Sumatra to Malacca and from Vietnam to Peninsula Malaysia and so on and forth. This interconnectivity project alone will unlock a lot of benefit on ASEAN Power Grid, on multilateral or blended financing and so on, potential. Let's talk about Malaysia challenges. The number one is the carbon tax. We're missing this carbon pricing in Malaysia. But I think last week the Prime Minister announced this budget. We're going to begin something on 2026 on carbon tax. And the other thing is, and Minister mentioned this morning on cross-border carbon trading. How are you going to actually transfer this carbon pricing cross-border? And the other thing on tariff itself, the way we design the tariff is a cross-subsidy. We are not yet cost-reflective tariff, so there's a missing, distorted economic in the tariff itself. So when you want to balance between energy security, affordability, and sustainability, it's difficult to achieve, maintaining the balancing between three, sometimes can be a competing objective. But I think the conversation is very frank now. There used to be that kind of excuses not to go to the environmental side. We go to more security. We spend a lot on security and so on, but we tend to forget on sustainability. But now conversation is very, very open. We have to take care of this carbon, GHG emissions. So we realize this how important that we have to go together. These 10 ASEAN countries, we have to help each other. We have to mutually benefit each other. It's a win-win, actually. Look at the Laos. They only have 7 million population, but they have a 20,000 megawatt massive hydro potential in Laos alone, and Indonesia and Malaysia and so on. Then in Thailand, and of course you mentioned about Greater Mekong project. We can combine. Now we are extending this Laos, Thailand, Malaysia template into Borneo. We call Borneo involve Philippines, Indonesia, Brunei, and Malaysia. Yeah. So the successful of ATMS, the multilateral power integration project. So I keep saying to my colleague that we don't have to wait for the perfect market model. We can start somewhere. We started with the bilateral trading between two neighboring countries, butter trading and purely on security reason, and we upgrade into commercial. Now we're going to a more market-oriented. And we hope next year, when Malaysia is the chairman of the ASEAN summit, we will introduce some breakthrough. So there are a lot of hope for Malaysia to drive through ASEAN power grids dreams that we have been dreaming so many, many years. Yeah. This is a new impetus. The energy transition needs transmission, realization of ASEAN power grid. Yeah.
That's great to hear, and particularly on carbon pricing at BNEF, we completely agree on the importance of that. We actually have a public resource called the Carbon Knowledge Hub, which we launched 2 years ago in partnership with the Indonesian B20 G20 presidency, and that's being updated this year with the Brazilian G20 presidency, tracking progress on the 60 carbon pricing mechanisms globally. So please, have a look at that, and hopefully that's useful for driving discussions here in the region. Mousumi, I want to turn back to you. Really just to talk about what it would take from a major energy user's point of view, what your members would like to see in order to be able to also go faster on their clean energy journey. Like, what do you think they need to see to be able to move faster?
Actually, a lot of it has already been talked about, which is exciting. But I just want to answer that question by double-clicking on some of the themes that have been brought up here. One is around, Dato, you talked about integration. For the need to have cross-border collaboration. It was talked about this morning as well. And from a semiconductor industry perspective, where our supply chain is clearly very deep and it's also distributed geographically, I mean, there's no way you can claim supply resilience by staying in one little island forever, right? So the business requires you to be around the world. And if you need to be around the world, then you also need to be, able to have sustainable manufacturing around the world, right? So that need exists clearly as a prerequisite. So the cross-border collaboration in terms of building sustainable supply chains is important. There's a ton of investment coming up in all parts of the world in the semiconductor business. And investors look for three things when they make these investments. One is when they choose which region to go into. One is around subsidies, what sort of incentives are there for us to exist there. The second piece is around supply chain resilience. And then the third piece around sustainability. Number 2 and 3 are very closely tied in terms of the regional collaboration that's required, right? So we acknowledge that sustainability is a team sport here, right? No one country, one company, or one CEO can solve it on their own. So with that in mind, what you talked about here about collaboration is primary in terms of meeting our needs. The second piece, which we see as a challenge, and Heidi, you discussed this as well, which is the cost barrier. And the conversation there is, what can we do as an association, as a collective, in terms of bringing in a scale demand to have that conversation, right? At this point, so last year at COP28, we launched this energy collaborative, which brought the demand piece of it, which is our semiconductor players, mostly the large players with a large carbon footprint, to come in and say, how can we have a consolidated voice in this discussion? So that voice is not only relevant in terms of the advocacy that's required, but also in terms of presenting a consolidated, scaled up demand, which hopefully, from the investment side is an attractive discussion. So we try to make this a many-to-many conversation, change that a many-to-many conversation to a many-to-one conversation. So the hope is that through this collaborative, within our entire supply chain, we're able to find ways to lower the barrier towards the cost factor. Investment, commercial instruments, it's not something that we do all the time, and this is where we would very much like to have conversations with ADB and see what's out there to support our members in terms of being more willing to do the off-taking and being able to accelerate the procurement conversation. So those are some of the topics that we see, and clearly the regulations have to be supportive, and I think you're doing that from a government perspective. The cost has to be reasonable, and then the procurement options, right? It's not just enough to have the energy out there, we've got to be able to offtake those.
I want to talk a bit about storage and grids as well. So we talked about tripling renewables. This year it's likely that there'll be a global goal agreed to increase energy storage by 6 times. So 3 times for renewables, 6 times for storage. It seems like that's going to probably get agreed at COP29. And we think grid investment probably needs to double annually, grid investment. So, I mean, this is sort of an open question, so I'm not sure who wants to try and tackle this one, but how realistic do you think it is to kind of achieve those kinds of scale-ups on storage and grids, and what do you think it'll take, or what would you like to see to start getting on track for those kinds of scale-ups in grids and storage?
Yeah, this is one of our favorite topic on, in business they call location. In this energy transition, it's grid. You don't want grid to be underinvested. You start having the bottleneck, a constraint. People are queuing up. Like in UK, gigawatts are being queuing up. Project can't be rolled out because of the long queue. That's why our policy in Malaysia that we won't allow that to happen. We make sure that this intermittency, variability issue is not an issue. We always make sure we have ample grid, and because of the solar uniqueness of solar variability, that is why we have started putting up battery project. We have awarded Tenaga to start with 100 megawatt for 4 hours pilot project. We're going to roll out massive battery project, IPP like capacity payment and so on, not part of rate base of Tenaga. So that's one model that we're looking at. So we need a lot of battery to mitigate all this high penetration of variability of RE. Yeah. So I agree with you. Grid have to be in parallel to be securely invested. Then we have to reach the 2/3 of our capacity mix in 2050. We need a massive solar. So of course, massive battery. We do have other option, pump storage. We look at others type of storage that could be attractive option because we have many large hydro in Malaysia. So just hydro pump storage is one option. And who knows, there could be another technology. But I would imagine in 2050 or 2070, when we have this 70% of battery coupled with solar, I think we can run the system. We have proven, without the conventional, without this inertia, with the rotating masses and so on. It is possible. With the kind of technology that we have today, I think I can future-proof project that we're able to run variability of solar, intermittent wind and so on with battery. The game changer is the battery. You need to store the energy, then you can control how you dispatch those energy to make the system stable. Yeah.
Thank you.
Maybe if I can, and I think Albert, if I may, I think that's 2 separate topics. I mean, they're interconnected, but I'm going to tackle them one by one. So on battery, I think there's no question, right? We need more battery storage to make sure that renewable energy is more closer towards baseload. That's obvious. But the biggest challenge with battery is it's way too expensive and at the moment. And let's hope with the way technology is moving, just like we've seen on solar panels, that those costs are going to come down. And we could spend another couple of hours, but this is where, and Heidi touched on this, this is where we have to find more blended finance options to finance battery combined with say, solar, right? So that's the challenge. I mean, a number of the financings that are being done that do combine battery and solar today either don't take any account of any revenues from battery or have to find some either governmental support or concessional finance to cover the battery. So that's battery. On transmission, I mean, again, I think you're hearing from everybody this morning. Again, I would break it down in two facets, right? There's the issue on domestic transmission. And there are a number of countries, if you strengthen the grid from the public sector, the Asian Development Bank would love to finance with countries. We should actually be financing only transmission, ideally. So that, because once you strengthen the grid, then actually the private sector can easily handle generation because they're more comfortable and there's no issues on curtailment risk, right? I mean, you look at a country like Vietnam, again, the single biggest issue of putting more renewable energy in Vietnam is curtailment risk. If we can work with the likes of EVN and their subsidiary NPT on strengthening their transmission, no problems on the generation. And then this whole thing on cross-border. I mean, again, I think, we're all super excited that there might be a realistic chance of at least a part of an ASEAN power grid happening in the next couple of years. But then let's all make it happen, right? Next, 1 year from today, if we're sitting in this same room and there's not a single deal closed, then that's a problem for all of us, right? So let's make sure there's been some fantastic announcements, again, led by this amazing country that we're all living in here today in Singapore, right? So, but let's make some of that a reality. And one of the things I would really encourage everyone, let's start taking what I call the low-hanging fruit, right? Some of these transmission interconnections, let's do from country A to country B, and I won't name the countries, right? Rather than, because some of the other ones, we're talking about going through multiple jurisdictions. And let's not kid ourselves that increases the level of complexity. But if we can do one, a simple country A to country B, then we can use that as a template to do more on transmission. And ASEAN Power Grid connecting, as everyone said, where the demand is to where the supply is obvious. But now, let's make that a reality.
I'll take that challenge personally. Yeah.
Sorry?
I'll take your challenge personally.
Great. Wonderful.
I'll just chime in there to say, I agree fully with everything Jackie said. On top of that, for transmission, I think what we've observed in Southeast Asia is that a lot of the grids are very largely owned by state-owned enterprises, right? So very closely held by the governments. And that means when we want to upgrade these grids, right, and build more interconnectivity, the burden of investment lies on the government. And that's actually a really difficult problem to crack, which is where blended finance would come in. We also want to be able to encourage more private sector investment, participation in this space. And how do you do that when it's all controlled, right, very centrally? So providing clear roadmap and visibility of the longer term outcome that the government and the region seeks to achieve is quite key in helping investors understand where the risks lie and how they might participate in a way that's risk mitigated. And I think Malaysia's leading the charge here with a very clear and well drawn out NETR and the commitments that have been announced. I think it's very helpful for long-term investors to have a view of where they can participate in helping to, or perhaps participating in microgrids or off-grid investments that would support the build-out of battery technology, whether it's solar.
One of the ideas that we have been thinking on to opening up at least the interconnectivity project between two utilities be a private owned. We call merchant model, but in the past, this utility always thinking about security, country sovereign security, but we can put the proper guidelines. In the case of emergency, the government will override those commercial, but rarely that happens. But of course, that's one of the ideas that too, because private know how to finance those, because they have interest, because they're willing the power from country A to country B. So those something that we are thinking those along that model.
And I also wanted to talk about technology, right? That is associated, the appetite to take on new technology. It was very interesting, this one piece of data I saw. So just for information, a semiconductor factory or a fab, it takes about 5 to 6 years to build from startup to production. And that, we believe, is a really long time. Of course, that's becoming shorter with the digital technologies. A data center takes about 2 to 3 years to come up. A grid infrastructure takes about 5 to 10 years to come up. This was a surprising piece of information for me. So I'm assuming here, and hopefully it's a correct assumption, that the improvements that are required is something that is going to take a lot of innovation, appetite for new technologies to accelerate that cycle time. And it's good to hear that perhaps there are blended finance instruments that will help to uptake those new technologies. One of the, we heard this morning from Scott Rees on software solutions that are, that can help with a lot of the digitization and as well as the curtailment-related topics. And the thought here is, how can we accelerate a lot of the digital technologies that exist, encourage governments to support the uptake of that, right? There are easy wins there that we can quickly put in. And then there are the more exotic technologies, which hopefully is going to require some finance to get incorporated. So I think there is probably some opportunity around innovation that can help relieve some of the grid-related concerns we have. And the same goes for new battery technologies, right? There has to be an appetite to adopt those, and finance would clearly help with that adoption.
Thank you. We only have a few minutes left, so I'm going to skip some of the questions that we prepared, and I'm going to go to my quick-fire round, which we haven't prepared. So the panelists do not know these questions. So what we're going to do, I'm going to say a series of statements, and after each statement, I'm going to ask each of you to agree or disagree with the statement. If you disagree, you can give a quick reason why. So my first statement is, renewable energy technologies like wind and solar require more subsidies to be deployed in Southeast Asia. So you can agree or disagree. Mousumi, maybe we start with you, and then we can come down the line.
Agree.
Disagree.
Disagree.
Agree. The beginning cost is more expensive, so we need some kind of intervention.
For the two that disagreed, any sort of expansion on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'd be very concerned if you need subsidies for wind and solar. I think you need subsidies potentially for some of the new technologies, but if we are not comfortable with wind and solar by now, we got a real problem.
Okay.
Well, I mean, are we allowed to?
Yeah, go for it, yeah.
If so, why would we even be talking about all of this, right? But we're still talking about it, so clearly there is some opportunity.
There are other bottlenecks. It's not the technology.
Yeah. Okay,
Statement
2.
Cost of integration, you need to integrate wind and solar.
It's not an economic problem per se.
Infrastructure,
Okay, a faster move to clean energy will be good for energy security and affordability.
Agree.
Agree.
I think it depends.
After the recent crisis, after the COVID crisis, I agree.
Agreed.
We
Okay.
need to jump ahead to our green energy.
Okay. Statement number 3. We need free trade of clean energy technologies to succeed on energy transition.
Agree.
In an ideal world, agree.
I agree.
We're moving toward market mechanism. Agree. Yeah.
Okay, good. Just a couple more. Okay, the next one is we have enough money to finance the transition. Maybe we start this way and go that way.
Agree, but cheaper profit.
Okay, lower return.
Lower return.
What do you think?
Lower return.
I would agree, but it depends on what we define as we.
Definitely agree. The issue I always say is not capital, it's finding bankable projects. The money is there, so in certain cases, you need the right type of money, but I'm not worried about the money, I'm worried about the pipeline.
I'll go with Jackie's answer.
Very good. Okay, the last one is easy. So it is, my next car will be an EV.
Yes, definitely.
Agree.
Why is it not already? And you should actually take the bus. Or walk. Singapore is a great place to walk.
I agree with Jackie as well. I do not have a car.
Wonderful.
Let me qualify with the lower return. The return is for our kids. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah. Okay. Well, it's been a wonderful discussion. I've learned so much from all of you, so I really appreciate you sharing your insights with all of us today. Please join me in thanking our panelists.